This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Christy Fauci. Now, I have to say this before anything else. Christy is related to me. Her grandfather and my grandmother were siblings. And even though she's related at the same tree level, I think there's like a 30-year difference between us. So I find that really, so everybody now listening, trying to figure out what the tree looks like, just think of our grandparents, our parents, and then we're kind of there with a 30-year gap. I don't know that happens, but it happens. Anyway, thank you for joining the show today, Christy.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to sit down and chat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever, even though we're family, I don't know what you call this level of cousin or something. I've never understood family tree.
I think it's like twice removed. No, maybe once removed.
You know, I never understood that.
I'm not sure.
I always think of like removed as like somebody got divorced and now you're removed.
Yeah, so the number of times you've been divorced.
Yeah, I don't understand the removal thing, but at some level, we've got a little bit of the same DNA flowing through our system, so that's kind of cool. Okay, give everybody like 2 minutes to tell them what you're doing today.
Yeah, so right now I'm a PhD student at Duke. I am studying genetics and genomics, so that will be the thing that is on my degree.
Okay, time out. I'm gonna interrupt you a lot during this thing. Genomics. I've heard of genetics. What is genomics?
So genetics is kind of taking the base pair by base pair, so the actual sequence of the DNA, and understanding it kind of molecularly, so how it's functioning in a cell. But the genomics side of that is a little bit more of a modern take. It's a little bit more conscious of everything else that's going on in that environment. And how the DNA is interacting with proteins and itself to kind of create this environment that is existing in cells more holistically.
Okay. Finish your 2-minute spiel, and I'm going to get back to that. Okay, but finish the 2-minute background.
So that's what my degree will be in. I've spent a lot of my time in grad school working under Craig Lowe at Duke, and he's a wonderful mentor. He started at the same time I did and was really, really excited about this project in vertebrate evolution, where we're trying to understand how vertebrates are just so different from each other, but have a very, very similar genetic toolkit that they all kind of overlap and use together. There's a lot of tools that we've used throughout my 4 years with him to try to understand that. But most recently and most exciting for me, the part that I've been doing most is using alignments. So this is multiple vertebrates, their sequence, their genetic code, and comparing them to each other to try to understand the context of how they might be different and where they are similar to each other.
So like comparing a human to a lizard,
to a chimpanzee or a lizard or a bird, something like that. Yeah, or fish. So trying to use the sequence of each individual animal to understand each other. And that is all a very computationally focused task.
Okay, I don't want you to get too far. We're going to get there. Okay. Because if you've listened to any of the shows, we're going to get there. But so you're on the edge of graduating now with a PhD.
Yes, should be done in about a year-ish, hopefully.
So in a year, we can call you doctor.
Yes. Correct.
So, my sister has a PhD in microbiology. I
Right.
couldn't even read the title of her thesis. She handed me this paper. I couldn't read the title. I handed it back. I was like, "Okay, you win." What's the title? What's the title of your thesis?
My thesis is as of yet untitled, but we'll have something in the realm of vertebrate
Something
evolution.
that I can't pronounce. Okay, that's fair. It's all good.
Well, hopefully I will have the forethought to make it pronounceable, but distinguishable is another level.
That's brilliant. Okay, I want to get back to that, but I do also want to hear your story because another reason I have Christiane is in her LinkedIn profile. She mentioned that all that computational stuff that they have to do, which I pushed back on just yet. She is using the Go programming language to do, I don't know, all or some of that work. I was shocked that it wasn't Python, but we're going to get there. And once I saw that she was working in Go and it was this sort of, what she just described, the work she's doing, my mind blew up because you don't get to hear the use of Go in this space too often. At least I don't. So I'm super interested in how all that happened, but we got to get there. So I'm going to put you in the time machine, Christy. I apologize, but I got to ask you a very personal question now. And that is, what year did you graduate from high school?
High school was June of 2014.
You're a 2014. That my last guest, Camden, was also 2014. But you graduated there on the island. I say the island of Long Island, the island of Long, right? And that's where you're living right now.
Yeah. Well, so
Oh
sorry.
no, because you're in
That's my
Duke. You're in
parent.
North Carolina.
Exactly.
You're in Carolina, but you grew up on the island of Long prior to going to university. You know why I say the island of Long, Christy? I went to school in SUNY Potsdam. I doubt you have any idea where SUNY
No, I've
Potsdam
heard.
is.
I've heard of.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's up by the Canadian border. Okay, and I was up there. I went to school up there in like '88, and somebody asks me, "Where are you from?" So I said Long Island, and they were like, "What island?" And I'm looking at them like, "What do you mean, like the Long Island?" And they're like, "I never heard of Long Island." Well, like, which of the islands? And I still have no idea what they're talking about. And then I finally realized that there's an area in upstate New York called Alexandria Bay. Have you ever heard of Alexandria Bay? There's 1,000 islands there that separate New York from Canada. So they're trying to figure out what of the 1,000 islands was
Is
long, I
long.
guess. Then, right? Like to you and me, like Long Island is a big part of New York, right? So after that, I used to just say the island of Long, just to people would get it or not. And it's just wild up there. Let's see that's 2014 in the summer. I mean, yeah, basically summer of 2014, and now we're in 2023. So I mean, that's like 9 years. That's 9 years ago. Man, you've been in school for 9 years. Wow.
Yeah, I've been in
Better,
school for a
better.
very long time.
I'm always excited when I have family that's like this level of educated. Like I think it's good for the family. But 9 years is a long time. I couldn't wait to graduate from undergrad. My undergraduate degree. Okay, so we got 2014. So I'm not gonna. My typical question to guests is usually like that first time you worked on a computer that you had that moment where you could control it. I don't know if that's a valid question, but I'm going to ask you this one anyway. Do you have that moment where like you got your hands on a computer and it was just kind of magical for you?
Yeah, I absolutely have that moment. It was in grad school. I did some like really basic coding classes in high school, and I didn't really ever think about it again. It was like HTML and JavaScript, so it wasn't any back end stuff. And then I went through college, whatever. I got to grad school, and I started learning how to use a terminal in like various shell languages. I got to this point where I was like, I don't know how to fix this. No one's around me to help me. I'm just going to figure it out. Um, and like through various googling and everything did figure it out. And like I can't describe to you the endorphin hit that happened at that moment. It was just like this,
You
like I
felt
had a
all
problem.
powerful. You
I
felt all
felt so
powerful.
so powerful, and that's like the only good way to describe it, is that like I was like, I can do whatever I want from here on, like I've got this.
Wow, but you didn't get to experience that until you were like
Until I was
20.
like 23, 24,
Wow.
23-ish. Yeah, like it
And
was
now, so that's like crack cocaine now. Like you want that crack all day. I want my wife just started coding school, and she just did her first week. And on Saturday, she was like struggling to solve this problem, struggling to the point where like she wouldn't give up. And then finally, I think she solved it and she was all happy. And I looked at her and I said the same thing. I go, we have to set some boundaries because you've just tasted the crack. And if we don't set boundaries, you're not going to get off the pipe. Like, this is what I said to her. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm go, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. Trust me. We have to set some boundaries or you won't
yeah.
ever stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is very serious. And I don't know how universal this experience is, but especially in grad school, you get to this point where like eh, there's very few boundaries that you would cross that somebody would be like, okay, you should back off a little bit. Like that's probably too much. Nobody would say that. Like that's just not how the environment works here. So like I've had to kind of find that for myself, where I'm like at like 10 p.m. I'm like trying to go to sleep and my brain is like trying to piece together whatever code that I'm working in at the time. And I have to actively stop myself from like getting up and going to my computer and just like pull out my phone, like write a note to myself for the next day and put it down and try to forget about it. Um,
That's brilliant at 20, because when I was basically from my 20s all the way up into about my 40s, I would have gotten up. I mean, I would have done it. Now I've learned I don't work on Sundays. I even had to sit her down. I go, here are the rules. We don't open the computer on Sundays. That's family day. Since you're in class, I'll let you work till 9 p.m., but that's the cutoff. And it's going to have to wait till tomorrow. Don't worry. The sun will rise tomorrow. And
the problem will
so
still be there.
it's amazing that you've been able to already learn that's going to be really healthy for you.
It helped that that hit came after I was already like in school for so long and like had already kind of tried to establish healthy boundaries with like my work in general. But I tend to hyper fixate on whatever problem I'm dealing with. So this was just when I got to this part of this post endorphin hit. Christy just kind of was like, okay, that was too good too quickly, like, and kind of too easy to do again to just let that happen regularly. There needs to be some amount of delayed gratification here.
I'm glad you got that experience. Yeah, yeah. My wife laughs when I call it crack. I'm like, it's crack. That's what it is, and you want it all day long. You don't mind the struggle because you know once you get it,
It's gonna feel really good.
really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to put you in the time machine a little bit because I'd like to kind of explore how you got sort of where you are, and then I'm going to leave definitely some time to talk about programming and Go and maybe what you're looking at towards the future as you got one more year, you said, but you're okay, but that's fine. Now is also the time to start kind of looking at what you want to do, and that might even change in a year, but we're going to get there. So I'm kind of curious, and maybe we start as you're entering high school, right? When you're like 14. Now that's when school is. We don't tell middle school kids that everything they're doing right now doesn't matter. Like I got married again, and I've got a 15 and an 11-year-old, so she's like finishing up her elementary school now, right? She's in 5th grade. And every time I go to say, this doesn't matter, my wife's like slaps me. She's like, shut up. But it doesn't matter until they get to high school. She goes, shut up. I don't want them thinking that, right? Um, but as you're getting into high school now, uh, think back, like what were you doing? What were your interests, both, let's say, academically and then outside of maybe the academics entering into high school?
So I will say that my family was never the family that was like, oh, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it until high school. It was always like, right now, this matters. Like, pay attention, do well. Um, and I like very much took that to heart. So when I left middle school, I had already started taking high school level classes. Um,
In
because
middle school, you were
I was
already
like
taking.
that. Yeah.
Okay, time out, time out. I'm gonna pull back. This is gonna happen throughout the entire interview. Will you give me a couple minutes on your parents, like a little sense of who they are, and then kind of what, at least definitely at that time too, like what they're doing.
Yeah. So my mom has been in education her whole career, her whole life. So she student taught at the school that she ended up working at until she retired 2 years ago. So she had been at Brentwood school districts on Long Island, Island of Long, for over 40 years when she
What
retired. But
grades did she teach? All different grades?
she taught all across, but she was a special ed educator. So she was doing special ed until about the time I was born, and then she became an administrator, and she was an administrator for the rest of her career, also in special ed. And so at the time, she was had been an administrator for a while, so she was in that phase of her career where she was working year round instead of just the 9 months that there is school. And she was always super busy at work, but super adamant that we like have lives outside of school. So that was mom. So like making sure that we had like a balanced childhood. And
Let me
then my
interrupt real
yeah.
quick. Was it good, bad, indifferent that your mom was always part of the school system? Like that puts more pressure on you to not be a bad seed, I guess. It's not that you would have been, right? But still.
No, but it was very like clear that there were like, you know, that any kid that was like having a hard time or like needed to go through this process of like getting I'm not sure what the word, accommodations through like the special ed program. There would definitely be times where she was like extra stressed out for whatever reason at the circumstances surrounding that process. And so it kind of like showed me a little bit of the other side of um the effect of kids who uh were in that position of needing uh, accessibility to things that I don't understand and I didn't understand at that time, um, and like what that looks like for everyone in the district. So like that extra amount of care and time and energy that goes into that was always something that I was aware of because that was what I was seeing my mom deal with on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, so I mean, it definitely gave me a little bit of a peek at the other side you know of who I was interacting with every day, like in terms of like the staff and what they were dealing with. Because, there's a little bit of that feeling as a kid that like your teachers are your teachers. Like you don't really think about them outside of the
When you see
context of
them
them.
outside of the class at a
Right.
supermarket, it always freaks you
It's
out.
freaky.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
at least got a little bit of that, like, okay, they're a person, they have children, like have a little compassion kind of thing. Very, very, very
But you
young.
didn't feel pressure to like not get in
Not from
trouble because
No,
mom
man.
was like in that.
I was scared of getting in trouble just all on my own.
Regardless.
I didn't need help.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was I still am very much a rule follower. I don't like it when there's not rules or like edges to what I have to worry about. So yeah, so
Well, that's
I was
fair.
a rule follower just by nature.
That's
Probably
fair.
because of my mom, because she is also a very much a rule follower.
Yeah, I told the 15-year-old a couple of days ago, like, however the conversation went, she's like, "Yeah, well, when you were a kid, you could get away with stuff, and I can't." And I looked at her, I said, "I couldn't." I go, "If I got caught for some of the things I did, I would have been in the hospital, not in jail." In the
The
my
hospital.
mom would say, if you get arrested, tell them to keep you there because if I get my hands on you, you're gonna be in the hospital. Like, and I believed it.
My dad was the disciplinarian for us. So like when I also had two older siblings. I also had one younger sibling, but he's not relevant to this point. I had two older siblings. My sister's 8 years older than me, and my older brother is 2 years older than me. So I just got to watch them get in trouble for various things. I was like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay, check. We're good. I'm all good. I didn't do any of the things I shouldn't have done. And my brother, being a teenage boy, was like very much into the like, let's get in trouble for something weird. Like,
Trust me, number 5, my youngest boy, number 5, he was so smart. He would know that if I threatened violence, like I was never actually going to put my hands. The other 4 kids had doubts,
there was
right?
a single doubt in your mind that you
Yeah,
might.
so they'd behave. Number 5 would laugh. So the only way to discipline number 5 at an early age, like 2 years old, 3 years old, was to throw him out in the backyard and lock the door on the patio and tell him, you're no longer allowed in this house. And then he would correct like this. Like that
Like
would
so
get to
fast.
him. Yeah, like the idea of abandonment would get to him. But the idea of violence was nothing for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah. My older brother just like kind of he had that big group of friends that like they're all just like teenage boys, just like suddenly picking up a skateboard for like after never having skateboarded and like going and finding something to jump off of, like very much like teenage boy behavior. Um
all
so
right.
I
So
was
your
like,
mom was an educator
my
and an
mom's an educator.
administrator.
My dad was the one that was like, you know, you got to do good in school, like it really matters. uh you need to focus on that because that's how you get places. He was of the mind that like you give yourself as many options as possible and you don't ever have to worry about, you know, where you end up that way.
What was your dad doing? Yeah,
Oh,
career.
he's always been an entrepreneur. He like very much was like interested in doing the things that he wanted to do, um, and not interested in having a boss as frequently as possible. So he had that point had just started a company that he still has now that's um, gets NIH funding, National Institutes of Health funding, as a small business for medical uh, devices. So he kind of develops that, but that was around the time that he started that company and like got it going. But yeah,
Okay,
he
so
develops
that's
medical
interesting. So there's
devices.
some medical coming from your dad's side of things. So as you're entering high school, what are the things that you're interested in? You said you'd already been taking some high school credit.
Yes, yes. I was taking high school credits at that time, um, and that was in like math and science. But I had always been interested in biology, so there was no real question for me that you know that was my focus and
But
like
why
going into high
biology?
school.
Where do you think that comes from?
So biology for me was really interesting from the get go. I remember my first biology class, like just biology class, was
In
in
high
like
school.
7th grade, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Middle
pretty
school.
early, and it was very much this kind of realization that's like I'm learning about something that is currently happening inside of my body. Like this is information that's like not just abstracted away or you know this is you know something that has happened or this is like how you solve this problem. It was like that what you're showing me is what's happening currently all over me right now. So that like very much was interesting to me, um, for whatever reason.
Wow, I've never heard anybody say anything like that. Because you always hear, why do I have to learn this math? I'm never going to use it. And I would almost have said, why am I in this biology class? I'm never going to use it. And you went complete opposite. You said, like, I'm going to use this like right now, this moment, I'm using it.
Like without me even thinking about it, my body is doing
Wow.
these things like period end of story.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was that like moment for me that I really got into biology. So like from there I wasn't really doubting that I would be
Okay,
like
but
biology
what were
focused.
you doing between that 7th grade and high school? Because you're not taking more biology classes. What are you doing outside of school to kind of scratch that itch, as I like to say?
I was very into sports in high in you know in middle school and high school. I played several sports, um, and it was just like this like constant awareness of like what I was doing as a result of like my biology.
What sports were you playing? Soccer, field hockey, basketball,
So
volleyball? You gotta tell
I,
me.
in middle school, I was playing tennis, volleyball,
Tennis.
basketball, softball. So
Wow. Okay.
there was 4 seasons, and I was in all of them for 2 years in
Right.
middle school. And then in high school, I did tennis and softball. So yeah, so I was like very aware that like, anytime I was moving, I was like using all of this stuff that I'd learned in biology. Like I was like moving my muscles in a certain way, and like there was reactions happening in me that like I wasn't even aware of. So things like that were like really, really interesting to me. Um, but yeah, so there's like just that awareness of
Are
myself.
you watching Discovery channels and
Yes.
YouTubes
Oh
at
my
that
God,
point too?
yes. Yeah.
Like
So
what was your favorite
yeah,
shows
at that
at the
point,
time?
I really loved Animal Planet, and I really loved. There was this weird, weird show on Animal Planet. I'm not even sure if I could remember the name, but they kind of built these robots that were supposed to like mimic the biology of two weird, like two animals, whatever it was in that episode. So, like for example, like a bear and a shark, and then they would just have those two robots face off to try to mimic the fight that would happen
That
between
was
a
the
bear and a
show
shark.
or
That was
that
the
was
concept of the show. Was
I've
like
never heard of
build.
that.
It was really cool show, and they built robots to try to mimic like the bite pressure and like the lunge distance, like the amount of like psi that you would need if like you got like smacked across the face by a bear, like things like
Animal
that.
Face Off, is that it?
Yeah. That's
Oh
it.
my god, I never even heard of that
It was
show.
so cool. It was such a cool show. I loved that show.
Eric, did you ever hear of Animal Face Off? Oh, okay, I got a note for that
It's a
one.
cool show.
But
Um,
did you feel like it was realistic enough at the time being able to build a robot that could
that show made it like seem like super realistic. Like, I mean, obviously, like you're not like it's building like the best case scenario of these two fighting each other. Um, so like it would have to be shallow enough water. Like it was like this like very like fun like hypothetical question of like if these two ever got into a fight, what would happen?
So it took the whole who would win in a fight, Superman or Batman, to a whole nother level.
Whole other level,
As
whole
you're a
different
kid,
level.
you would get into these massive arguments about superheroes if they had to fight each other. And now, like, I'm sure they were like geeks enough to say, if a bear and a shark got into a fight, but then they like were able to simulate it. It's
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So it was really, really fun. That was a big show for me. Mythbusters was a massive,
Okay, I watched that.
massive show for me. Um,
Mythbusters was cool.
that was like life changing watching that show.
Which episode? You know what episode I remember the most on Mythbusters was the one where they were trying to see what was the best way of getting rid of dizziness. So they would sit in a chair and spin, and eventually, like they would take Dramamine, and that always worked. But they tried other things. Like that one seemed the most practical because I used to like not be able to handle roller coasters and stuff. So that show was so interesting to me because I was like going to be my solution to that problem. Do you remember any particular episode from Mythbusters that
A
were like,
few. I loved the MacGyver episodes.
I don't remember?
They had whole episodes around like trying to mimic something that MacGyver had done.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
just
Eric's
like kind of
shaking his head, so Eric
like
remembers that.
picked out of whatever hat they picked out of. So the MacGyver episodes were really fun to me, and still to this day, anytime I'm like, I have to hook up this like air tank to whatever pipe, and like we don't have any of the supplies, I like go and like find the stuff, and then I call it MacGyvering because like that's just like my offhand comment. So those were always like super fun to me.
All right. So then, as you get into your freshman year in high school, I mean, you have set classes in high school that you have to take as a freshman, sophomore, junior. I remember. Okay, I went to school on the island of Long too. I think I remember science wise, like chemistry was in 11th grade. I hated chemistry. I don't remember what was in my earth science I did in 8th grade. So I don't remember
Yes,
my ninth,
same.
10th.
Yeah.
So what was ninth, 10th, and 12th grades? I remember the chemistry because I just hated it so much. Was not good at
So
it.
ninth grade, we actually had chemistry for me. So actually, sorry, no, you're right. It was another biology class. It was it called life science? I think in my first year of high school. You're right. So ninth grade was life sciences. And that was another biology class, which I loved. That was super fun. I think we started learning about genetics probably that year. I don't think we learned that much, at least not. And
I mean, it had to be really like high level. It couldn't have been that.
yeah, it was pretty high level at that time. But I think that's when we started learning a little bit, in depth on
You must have had
genetics.
health science too, right? I
I
think I
had health
remember.
later in high school. We could kind of take health whenever we wanted, so long as we took
Okay.
it. Yeah.
I just don't
Um,
remember the other. Okay, so the life science made
so it was
sense.
life science in ninth grade. 10th grade was chemistry for me.
Okay.
And then 11th grade, I took what was it? Was it AP? I think it was AP Bio for me in 11th grade, and then in 12th grade I took AP Chem. Um,
Whoa.
so yeah,
Whoa.
so
I
I
don't
got a lot of AP classes in whenever I
Do
could.
they did they still have that Regents exam when you were in school, the New York State exam?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, 11th grade. 11th grade was physics. I took
Physics. Okay.
AP Chemistry and AP Bio. I think both my senior year.
I think my freshman year was physics. It had to be one of those two. Okay, right, right. Physics. Did you like physics?
I
I
didn't
mean, I feel
particularly.
like that's a MacGyver thing, you know?
It was a MacGyver thing, so there was definitely times when I did like it, and I loved my teacher. But it was a little too like theoretical and abstracted for my taste. The way that it was taught. Um,
So you just piqued a memory that I remember being so mad at. I think it might have been the physics class. We were asked to make a battery. So I don't know, we had the material, we had everything, we made a battery. And then actually in this experiment, they asked us to make two batteries and put a metal wire across to look at how hot maybe it got. But I swear the instructions said touch the wire. And I touched it and I got a really bad burn. And I remember being so, and I'm looking at the wire and it's red and I know not to touch it, but the instructions are saying touch it. And my brain's going, don't touch that. Don't touch it. But the instructions say I have to touch it to answer something. So I must have made my battery too strong. I don't know.
so the end of this story is that you are also a rule follower.
That was the last rule I ever followed in my life. That
And it
changed
burned
me.
you, literally.
It burned me. That was good. That was the last rule I ever followed in my life. That was made me so bitter.
There we go. We found
So Eric, what did Eric just said? I would have made a good soldier up to that point.
up to that point, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
Even
I
to
would
your
have.
own like risk. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being so bitter after that. Yeah, I don't think I followed another rule ever since. That's it right there. I learned my lesson. That's funny. Okay, so your high school was fairly, I'm gonna say, kind of common. You were taking all the classes you had to take. I'm imagining that you did well in those classes. School sort of came easy to you. Did you have to study terribly hard?
Not in high school. I didn't really. I mean, like am very much of the persuasion of like once I've like written it down and like found a practical like once I've like problem solved it once and written it down, it's stuck with me for long enough that I didn't have to like worry about studying it typically.
So you're good at memorizing things. You can read
I'm pretty
something
good at
and
memorizing things to an extent. Like if you asked me a physics question now, I probably wouldn't be able to answer it.
no, that's not
But
fair.
like,
But
but like within the context of like the length of a high school class, yeah, I would just need like refreshers at the end of the year for the final kind of thing.
I mean, the stuff you're doing today, and I don't want to jump ahead, but really requires a lot of strong memorization
Yes.
and
And I would
detail.
say I would say that up until about like midway through college, I was probably the best person I knew at memorizing things. That very much like we burst that, wide open. Like the people at Duke that are like in PhD programs, like even some of my lab mates, like my ability to memorize is laughable in comparison to theirs. It is a skill that I have, but it is nowhere near their caliber for
You
sure.
thought you were at the top of the food chain, and then you meet.
Very
I
much
try to,
not.
I try to say this even to the kids all the time, because sometimes in life you start to surround yourself with people that are just so much more brilliant than you, and you start to feel a little bit bad about yourself. And I always, at least for me, I always have to remember, look, I'm just in the 50%. There's 50% of people that I'm smarter than. There's 50% of the people that I'm not. And I just happen to be really lucky right now because I'm surrounded by people that are kind of above me. And when I think about that, I calm down about not having that brain that this other person has, right?
It's very much something that you go through, especially in grad school. But I'm sure it happens to everyone. But in grad school, we tend to call it imposter syndrome. I'm sure that's like probably a more
We
general term.
we call it here. Yeah, everybody
Yeah.
has it.
Yeah. Like you don't like surround yourself with intelligent people and then feel good about yourself all the time.
No, but
Yeah.
at the same token, you got to remind yourself you're there because you worked hard enough and you deserve to be there. And most likely they're thinking the same thing about you at some level, even though it's hard to believe.
And they always are. They always are. And like that's something that's like very hard to like wrap your head around is like I feel like so much less than them and yet I know that they're also feeling that. So yeah, it's a really weird it's a really weird feeling.
It's really weird. And that never goes away. It never goes away.
No,
Unless you're
it
just going to
doesn't.
sit on the couch and watch TV all day. Then it doesn't go away.
Right. And then at the same time I like to remind myself in general that, you know, I'm act like I've never, felt worse for having been around a smart person in the long run. Like that makes me better. Like that helps improve me in whatever I'm doing. So, having that ability to be surrounded by people smarter than me is like not just, it's not in the hopes that I feel worse about myself at the end of the day. It's in the hopes that I'm improving myself at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you want that. But yeah, sometimes you have to readjust your brain and reminding yourself not to feel. Yeah, I catch at this point at 53, I can catch myself pretty quickly when I'm going down that path. And it sounds like you've already learned some of these lessons. I tell the 15-year-old all the time, I want your brain. Can I just borrow your brain? Like what I could do with your brain would be absolutely amazing because
That
I've
raw
done
confidence.
I've done this
Yeah.
well with this simple brain. I want your brain. I'm feeling the same way, Christy. I just can I borrow your brain for like 2 days? In 2 days, I think I could do a lot.
Yeah, and just give me a timeline. I'll get there.
So, as you're graduating high school, it seems obvious like you want to be in this bio field, but do you have a very specific sort of interest?
At that point, I was just really focused on going into biology. I did not have a plan, which was excruciating for me to acknowledge because I always have a plan for everything. So yeah, at that point, I go to college at soon.
But what? Wait. Don't. Whoa. My wife's going to laugh when she hears this. Whoa. You don't have a necessarily a plan, but I'm always like saying to myself, when I think biology, I think of like outdoor working in the ocean or working in the field. And I don't think of the, say, engineering side of it. So were you thinking more like where your dad was, maybe like medical devices and maybe stuff like that, or were you thinking field work?
I was thinking at that time I was not thinking field work and I don't think I was thinking engineering, but I maybe I was thinking a little bit engineering. Um like biomedical engineering realm. It was a thought that crossed my mind. The thing that people like wanted to push me toward was like med school. Like that is the most natural course for somebody who's saying that they're majoring in biology. That's the first thing everyone assumes. They kind of like have a pipeline for that uh,
But you
you
didn't want to
know,
be a doctor. You
concept.
weren't
I
looking
didn't
at
want to be a doctor. I don't
a
in
medical
general
doctor, a
right,
medical doctor.
exactly. I don't
Right.
I don't in general enjoy people enough to interact with them that much. So,
Your
so I was like,
bedside manner would have
my
been a
bedside
little lacking.
terrible, absolutely awful. I knew that about myself at that point. I was like, I wouldn't do well there. So that is like the pipeline that you go into when you're a bio major, especially when you're a freshman. Everyone's like, you're going to med school, just go. This is your route.
What schools did you apply to? Because it makes that a little harder to choose a school because you'd want a specialty in such a generalized field.
Yeah. So I went in, I applied all over. I knew that I wanted to be, on the East Coast at the very least. So I applied, like, I think a lot of people just apply to the Ivies just in case.
So like
Um,
what was your dream school and what was your safe school and what was the school that you thought that in the middle, like, I'm going to get in this?
so at the time, after I like toured campuses and stuff, I really wanted to go to George Washington University. Um, I really liked the energy of the campus.
That's in DC, right? Just outside of
Yeah,
DC.
it was
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was in DC. It was like there was, I remember in the tour they were like, there's usually like some level of Secret Service presence around just because of the proximity to the White House and to the Capitol. So, like it's one of the safest campuses there is, surely because it has to be. Um
Except that city, every time I go there, is just on, it's like high alert. Like everybody's anxious. I don't like going to DC. Everybody's like anxious and high strung.
on it. Yeah. But
Yeah.
at the time I was like really into that campus, really
So
into
that
that
was your
school.
dream school.
That was a school that I really wanted to go to.
Okay. Okay.
So I applied to Ivies, and then my safety school, which is not really like a safety school because it's an excellent biology program, but I knew I would get in, is SUNY Stony Brook. So State
Uh,
University of New York, Stony Brook
Stony Brook's
University.
a great university.
An
I used
amazing
to party. I
university.
mean, I couldn't get in SUNY, but I used to party over there. I mean, I had a lot of fun at Stony Brook.
So there's some like updates you need about Stony Brook. It is the least party school that I think is in the SUNY system at this point. Um,
Probably, but
yeah.
but you know.
So yeah. So that was the school that I was like, I know I can get in. I know it's an excellent biology program, but I don't necessarily want to be this close to home. Like I knew that about myself at that point, that I was like, going to school like 30 minutes from home is like not really what I want. I
You
wanted
would have
that
had
like
to stay
independence.
home. You would have had to commute,
So
and
so my
right.
parents were very adamant actually that we live on campus. They were like, "We want you at a house." Like, get out. So
Yeah, no, you need
so
that experience.
and they
School
knew
is
that.
50% of it is the academics, right?
And they knew that, and neither of them like went and like lived on college campus when they were in college. So they were like super super adamant about the college experience and like making sure that you're experiencing it to the extent that they are, that we are capable of doing so. And they also knew that I wanted to like not be quite so close to home and like have a bit of independence. So they were like really on board for me like going and living on campus, despite the fact that it was only like half an hour away.
Okay, so what schools did you end up having to choose? Like, what were the three schools that you now were debating once all the letters came in?
Yeah, so actually it was just two. It was George Washington, which gave me a pretty hefty scholarship, um, and Stony Brook. But anybody who's ever, heard about the SUNYs will know that it is incredibly, well priced for what it gives you, especially Stony Brook.
That's why I went. I had to stay. I wanted to go as far away as I could, but I had to stay in the SUNY system. And I found Potsdam. Okay, you
Yeah.
can't get
Yeah.
much farther than that. You really can't. You're at the edge of
No.
the universe.
With 1,000 islands somewhere
With
nearby.
1,000 islands. So now you understand my choice. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And then I rationalized to myself, like I was the third of four children. I was like, it doesn't really make sense for me to spend my college years going into like 2 to 3 times the amount of like tuition costs as if I go to Stony Brook and get an excellent bioeducation. Like George Washington is not necessarily known for its biology courses, whereas Stony Brook is. So it was like a rationalization thing more than like a where would I like to go thing. And like I said, I'm a rule follower. And I was like, it makes sense for me to go to Stony Brook. My best friend at the time was going to Stony Brook. My brother at the time was going to Stony Brook. And I was like, okay, I'll go to Stony Brook. So I went to Stony Brook.
So you did.
Yeah, I did
And
end
you
up going.
commuted, or did you get?
I
They have
lived on
campus.
campus. I
Yeah, they
lived
have
on
dorms there.
campus. Yeah,
Okay.
and I was very involved in residence life because I wanted that like extra bit of independence. So like, I participated so much in so many things, especially my first year. I like really pushed myself
And
to
it's an
like get
international
involved.
campus. I mean,
It's
there's
an
a lot of
international campus.
international.
Yeah. honestly, Stony Brook was probably the by far and away the best choice for me. Not just because of the bio program, but like it is an international campus. It's, in general, an excellent school. The Greek life is not allowed on campus, so it's like a little bit like
You're near Port
safer
Jefferson.
than that.
I had a
You're
lot of
near
fun
Port
I had a
Jefferson.
lot of fun in Port Jefferson.
Yeah, so like
Things we can't talk about publicly. Right? No.
Yeah, like it's a good spot, and you're a little bit like stranded if you don't have a car, which most of the freshmen and
Yeah,
sophomores
it
didn't.
feels like you're out in the middle of nowhere. At least at the time, even in the 90s when I was there.
Yeah, and like it still is. It still very much feels like you're kind of stranded there, which is kind of the feeling I wanted. I wanted to be like far enough away that I couldn't easily get back home, and because Long Island has no public transport except the trains, you're basically stuck there.
Oh, I tried buses when I was in high school and I couldn't drive yet. That was miserable.
That wasn't, yeah, it wasn't, it's not really like a good option on Long Island. So I go to Stony Brook. I meet like who is now one of my best friends. And like I'm with her for almost the whole time. She's an RA, so she's also in that residence life and like really participating. But in general, I'm like going through my courses and I'm, focused on biology. And I get to this point where I've got to pick like a specialization. So this is like my sophomore year, and I've got to pick like a specialization within biology. And at the time, my older brother, like I said, who was also there, this was like his senior year and my sophomore year. He and I decided to take the same course, which was general genetics.
What was he was getting a degree in biology too? Or
he was also doing a degree in biology. He actually ended up in med school. He like was in the pipeline.
That direction. Okay.
Yeah. So he was also doing biology. He was in his senior year, so he was just taking like his last few courses and decided to take this course independently of each other. We decided to take the same course, general genetics.
Like it was an accident?
It was an accident.
You didn't coordinate that.
We did not coordinate.
But it was at the same time, same class, same time?
Same exact class. We sat next to each other the whole semester.
Oh my God. Two Faucis sitting next to each other?
Yeah, it was a lot for that class. There was probably people like on either side of us that are like, who are these people?
Was
like,
this a big class? Was this one of those auditorium classes? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was at least a few hundred people.
Okay.
Yeah, so at the time, we didn't know that each other was taking it, and then we found out that we were taking
Who did better?
class.
Who did better? Who did better in that class?
So within an hour of finding out that we were taking the same class, Alex, my older brother, sends me a message like, or I can't remember if we were in the same room or if he texted me, but he was like, let's make it a competition. Like, let's say who does better. Let's like definitively say who's smarter.
Wow. And you still sat next to each other.
He said that, just for the record. And we sat next to each other the whole
bragging
class.
rights? Bragging rights?
For bragging rights.
Okay. Which, guess what? You now have a platform to brag.
Exactly why I'm bringing up this point. So
hey,
I'm
Alex,
like,
you got to be careful, bro. This stuff comes back.
I didn't start it. I didn't start this. You wanted to have a competition. It was your words that were saying definitively who's smarter. I was uninvolved in the conception of this. So I was like, okay, all right, fine. Knowing that like all through high school, I had better grades than him. So he was like very, very motivated to beat me. And he was also 2 years older than me. So he was like, he really wanted to win this. And so all semester we were competing, like pretty much neck and neck. At the end of the semester, I beat him by like 0.5 points. Like it is a slim margin, but I'm like, I won anyway. Like I won.
No, you won. Didn't matter. Could have been 0.001. It didn't matter.
Yeah, I won. So this is now my bragging rights. I get to brag about the fact that I am definitively, in his own words, smarter than my brother.
And every time somebody listens to this, you got that extra brag in there.
One more time. And then at the end of my doctoral degree, we'll both be doctors, and so it'll be like this very neck and neck scenario. He'll be one kind of doctor, I'll be another, but all's the same. So that was my first course, and that whole course gave me a very similar feeling as like my first coding problem that I solved. That like kind of endorphin rush. So I knew I wanted to go into genetics after that, and I got involved in that coursework, and that was an excellent an excellent set of courses. I really loved them.
I mean, that stuff is not intuitive or easy. So, did you find it like, was it hard for light bulbs to turn on? Like, actually interested in.
A lot of it made sense to me pretty quickly. There was definitely some things that were like, I do not know what you mean by that. And then it would like take me a few times going over it or like looking at it like on a YouTube video or something. And then all the pieces would like kind of click into place because there's like a logic to it. Like, I mean, like it's, biological function. There's a logic there. Um,
Are there like what I call cart and horse issues where sometimes you got the cart before the horse just because of where you are in the material, and so it's hard to arrange this stuff?
Yeah, and especially because of like you're coming into those courses with this like high school level understanding of stuff typically. So like they present things very definitively and when you're in high school for the simplicity of it so that you can like test on it and like there's not so much gray area. And then you get to college and you're a bit reprogramming those assumptions because it's not really that definitive. It's not very absolute. Like there's animals that have one mechanism of doing things and other animals that have entirely different mechanisms of doing things. So, it's a little bit of reprogramming and like cart before horse kind of.
So then, like, you're gonna graduate from Stony Brook with your undergraduate degree. Is this a BA or a BS
It was a
in what?
BS.
A
Yeah,
BS.
in genetics, in developmental genetics. Yeah, that
Did
was.
you have to do math too, though? Right? It had to be math for a BS. There's a lot.
Yeah, so I did calculus my first year or change. And then at Stony Brook, you're also required to do 2 semesters of inorganic chemistry and 2 semesters of organic chemistry. So basically, 2 full years of chemistry to get your bio degree, plus at least a full year of math, depending on what you come in with.
I mean, that's serious coursework.
Yes,
That's not
and
in our
like
class.
no, and it was very much not in our class, and like you had these 3 like 200 level courses which had like a massive range of difficulty. One, I think it was like the evolution course, which was uh known to be the one that like made the most sense. Like it was very much like logic based, like common sense kind of questions a lot of the time. But at the same time was still like a mandatory biology class. And it was really interesting to me to see that that was like the simplest of the courses because if I'm remembering right and it was an evolution based course, like that should not have been an easy course to take. But it was known to be the course that anybody who had to take a science credit that was not in a science, they would take that course. So there was that course.
So I have a question. Did you, during that 4-year degree that you're getting, were there internships that you were able to take? And was there field work? Were there trips? Like, what were you able to do outside the
Yeah.
classroom?
So I wasn't doing internships. I actually got into a lab and was doing lab work during this research. Um,
At
So
Stony
that
Brook.
is at Stony Brook, at a lab at Stony Brook. Yeah. So that was actually super kind of difficult to get into. Stony Brook is an R1 institution, which basically just means like a massive research institution and has like frequent and like reliable funding. People are publishing papers. Like there is a sect of the faculty that is doing research primarily instead of teaching primarily. And so getting into those labs was pretty challenging at Stony Brook because you had a massive number of biology undergraduates and chemistry undergraduates who were trying to get into labs as an undergrad, which in and of itself was difficult due to the number of labs combined with the idea that you had to have a mentor. Like you couldn't really be by yourself in the lab for, safety reasons.
So how did you get into one of
I
these
emailed
labs with that level of
25 people.
company?
I emailed 25 people until somebody said yes. Yeah, it was like dozens of
You were the
emails.
squeaky wheel.
Yes, exactly.
So
Um,
I have a question. My sister did not have good experiences in the labs throughout her entire education, from undergraduate to graduate. the people who had the grants stealing her work, not even acknowledging it, and sometimes, and then other issues between male and like just did you? I hope the answer is no. Did you experience any of some of that same stuff in the labs?
There is an amount of like minimal problems that you will face just because it is academia. So I mean, the answer is yes, but I think to less of a degree than your sister. We have similar stories in that there's always going to be people who will go out of their way to try to get their name first on a paper, and like that's what's incentivized in academic research, is having your name first, um, which is a hard thing to balance with the interests of everyone who participated. And so things like authorship are like really difficult discussions, and we have whole courses in grad school around the concept of literally, and this is a quote, perverse incentives in academia. So, your incentive is to get as much grant money as possible and therefore to publish as much as possible. And that encourages you to do things that aren't necessarily in the interests of the funding agencies or your lab or the intent of the funding agencies or the lab. So, like, fudging data to like get a better publication, to get better funding, to get more funding. So yeah, so like there's whole courses around responsibility of research, and we have them because they're necessary. um, Duke not too long ago settled a whole conduct of research lawsuit with the NIH, um, where we have like extra oversight because of some questionable publication practices. So yeah, so there's a little bit of a minimum of that attitude that the lower you are on the totem pole and like seniority, the less prioritized you are. And that's not to say that that's like been my experience in my lab, because it's not been my experience in my lab. But everybody has a story on, they probably should have been on that paper, but probably weren't on that paper. Things like that. And then, yeah, in terms of just like general problems in terms of, being a woman in academia, there's definitely this sense, especially from like older female faculty, that will not turn around with malicious intent their experience, but turn around as in make things a little bit more challenging for the female students because they had experienced such challenges and they want to prepare you for those challenges. So it's not turning around so that you struggle so much as it is turning around so that you're prepared. um, and like whether or not that feels like it at the time, that's typically the intent with women in academia. So yeah, so that's a pretty like straightforward intent. And then there's also just like things that every single person in academia deals with, which is like this, you know incentive to give everything you can to your lab, and like to give everything you can and like produce as much as you can. And which is why I say that like boundary work is really important to me, because setting those boundaries helps you like deal with that pressure, because there is that pressure no matter if your PI is excellent, and my PI is great in terms of understanding when I'm like he might send me a Slack at 11 p.m., but it's because he's working at 11 p.m. It's not because he expects me to be working at 11 p.m. So like
Okay, yeah,
it's
no,
not.
so
Yeah, so like
yeah,
it's
that's
it's
fair.
pressure in that, like, if I feel pressure to answer him right this second, then it's going to be a bad, like, toxic environment. But I don't feel that pressure because he's made it clear that that pressure is not there, kind of thing. But that's not to say that everyone's like that.
No, and I would like to hope that that academia in that area has grown up from the time my sister went through that over, I don't even know, 20 years ago at this point, probably.
Yeah, yeah, it's grown up a little bit. Um, but then again, you're also more accessible because of emails and Slack messages and things like that. So
So as you're about to now graduate from Stony Brook with this degree, you know that you're looking to get a PhD at that point. That's kind of in your head. So what's your next step? Like, how do you get to Duke? Is Duke the only school that you care about at this point? Like, talk
At
about
this
that.
point. So it's really academia is a little bit weird in that like there is a little bit of like loyalty to institution, but there's more loyalty to like field and or like similar programs, if that makes sense. And you have so many collaborations that are possible that it's not really like a Duke's like the best. It's more of like a Duke is a really good tool for me to be able to like have more collaborations more extensively with more people in my field. It gives me a little bit more credibility to do those things because of the institution that I'm at and the level of it in general, like its name and its
I mean,
brand.
Stony Brook has a relationship with Duke. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so sorry, not in that frame of reference, more of like I was interested in getting into a school that would give me more credibility in order to, you know, have those relationships. So I wanted to go to a big name school, if that makes sense.
Right. But Duke couldn't have been the only one on your list. I mean, what other schools
and
were you
like,
looking at?
mind you, Stony Brook does have a relationship with Duke, but only because it has faculty and staff that, you know, were at Duke at some point. And academia is very like that. It's very incestuous in that way, in terms of like, oh, I went to Duke for this thing, it was fantastic, you should go to Duke. Like very much like perpetuating its own experience. So I at that point was TAing in like my last semester of college, and one of the professors had done his postdoc at Duke, and he had worked with somebody that is a little bit related to the department I ended up in. And he's like, I think Duke would be a great choice for you. It's very focused on basic biology, which is what I was wanting to study, instead of something like it's called translational research, which is like more direct, like we're studying this disease in humans so that we can find a cure or find something to help. And basic biology is more like we're studying yeast so that we can understand, you know, these mechanisms so that we can understand them better in other contexts. So I was really more in the basic biology interest. And so somebody had recommended that I go to Duke, and he actually ended up being one of my letter writers for my recommendations. And I applied to Duke, of course, but I also applied to UMich. They have an excellent genetics department. I applied again for the sake of saying I tried, to the all the Ivy Leagues, or not all, Yale, Harvard, and probably a couple of others. And then I also applied to Rochester, because they have a really good like stem cell and neuron kind of focus. So yeah, so those were like all on my list of schools. And so I sent out another bunch of applications 4 years after the first. And the way that grad school applications work is you send out your application, you have a GRE score. So that's the generalized testing, and they're subject tests, but most of them don't require subject tests. And then you send in a personal statement with like your general interests and like why you were interested in the school. So I send all that in, and then a few weeks later, you either get a call or an email that says something along the lines of, we'd love to interview you. Here are our interview weekends. At that time, that was the kind of the way that it was done pre-COVID. Here are interview weekends. Here's your host's name and email so that you can contact them. Who are you interested in meeting with so that we can schedule them? And what ends up happening is that you fly out on like a Thursday morning. You check into a hotel. You either have a roommate or you don't, depending on how lucky you get. And then you spend the next 2.5 days interacting with the students that are currently in the program, interacting with faculty that you might work with, getting free food, and just being, incredibly involved in that process. And they try to like make it as fun as possible. So I end up doing that 5 weekends in a row for that whole semester, and which is incredibly taxing, I'm sure you can imagine.
No, I mean, it also has to get old. By the time you're on the fourth one, you're just like, do I really want to do this?
Yeah, and I even said, so it started in the end of January, and my first weekend off after that was my birthday. And I was like, this is my birthday present to myself, is not having to travel across the country for something. So yeah, so I interviewed all of these schools. They're all like so fantastic in terms of like they're, just really trying to get you involved. And like grad school has that energy of like you all come from very different, educational backgrounds and from very different schools and everything, but you're all interested in this one thing. And like that is enough for you to form a community. And everyone's just so excited for the new students to come. Even as a fifth year, I can still say this. Like everyone gets excited about it.
But are you basically in minus you screwing up over that weekend? If they invite you, are you basically in? It's like a personality test at that point?
It is very much personality test at that point. There's, depending on the school, anywhere from about 66% to about 75% of the people that get interviewed in person end up being accepted to that school. So it's a massive spike in your possibility of getting in, basically. So if you're invited to interview, you have a really good shot. Typically, it's somewhere around 70% that you'll get accepted.
So where did you get accepted? So out of these 5 schools, which
So I got accepted at Indiana Bloomington, at
okay.
UMich, at Duke,
Mich being Michigan, I'm assuming.
yeah, Michigan,
Okay.
University of Michigan.
Cold, go on, cold.
Yeah, at Duke, and then
temperate,
I'm
mild.
trying to remember what the other two were. Right, I didn't get into Rochester, but me and Rochester were not a good fit for each other. And then I can't remember the fifth school that I went to. Oh, it was a very different situation. It was actually like an institute in Michigan as well. I went to Michigan 2 weekends in a row. It was an institute, and it was much more translational. And I didn't end up getting in there because I didn't have the translational experience,
And you didn't
and
want
that's
that
fine.
anyway.
I wouldn't. I don't know that I would have had as good of a time there, but it was a really cool environment. So I was really really interested in them. Because like at that point I was like I could do a lot of things without being too upset at what I'm researching. And it was a really fascinating school.
So I'm guessing you chose Duke because you had relationships already and you could be set up.
So I actually was incredibly agonizing choosing between Duke and UMich because both of those would have been really good schools for what I was wanting to do. It ended up coming down to the fact that Duke had more faculty that I would want to work with, just in terms of research interest.
And you base that on things that were being published?
Things that are being published, there's faculty descriptions up on their websites, people I talked to during my weekend there. Duke had this super high percentage of like basic biologists, and because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, I needed to have as many possibilities as possible. So that ended up being my decision maker, which was genuinely a very very hard decision to make because UMich would have been an excellent choice, and I would not have regretted it. So yeah, so I ended up at Duke.
What year is that now? 18?
That was
No,
2018.
2018.
That was fall 2018 I started. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, coming up on 5 years there. So
Is that how long typically I thought you did your undergraduate and then you would get a master's and then you could go after your PhD. Isn't that technically how it I
that
mean, I don't know.
is how it was more so how it used to go. It's not really it's not a requirement, definitely. There's only one person in my cohort that got a master's before they came here, but it is not in general how it plays out. Typically, if you don't go right from undergrad, and typically that's more and more happening pre-COVID anyway. If you're not going right from undergrad, it's typically because you wanted to get more research experience so that you could have a better chance of getting into a school that did research. And so you work in a lab for a couple of years as like a lab tech, just to get some hands-on experience. And that's typical for somebody who goes to a smaller school that doesn't have as much research going on, or it's not like super well known. It's more of a teaching school and like a liberal arts school, things like that.
All right. So you were able to just go right from your undergraduate into the PhD program,
Right.
which
Because I
is it
had research
typically a
experience.
6-year? How long does the average person take?
So in my program, it's about 6 years on average.
Now, why is it 6 years? Because you still have classes you have to take, or there's a certain amount of hours that you have to have?
It's not a certain amount of hours. Typically, at least in my program, which is it's very different depending on where you're talking about. So in my program, we have about 2 years ish worth of classes. Maybe like a year and a half of classes, depending on how many classes we want to take in a semester. But that is happening simultaneously with doing lab work. So that first 2 years, pretty much, you're in lab working full time while also doing classes. So it's
Are you paying tuition or you're getting paid?
no. So in at least in biomedical in general related PhDs, we don't have to pay tuition and we get paid a stipend, which is set at a minimum according to the National Institutes of Health. And the reason that that is relevant is because the thing that pays me, the body that pays me my first 2 years when I'm in classes is my program, and they get money from the NIH to pay me. So the NIH says this is a minimum amount that you must make as a grad student. If you want to use our funding to pay your grad students, you have to meet that minimum.
And they give you a room too, or you have to go rent?
No, you go rent apartments. At least at Duke,
Okay.
it depends on the institute. But Duke does not have on-campus housing for grad
So it's a
students
big
for the most
deal when
part.
you're bringing somebody on because they're a cost center until you're able to publish something that generates the next grant or
Right.
money.
So typically we are, in general, probably making them more money than they're paying us, but like that's kind of how it all works. Because while we're actively doing research, that allows our PIs to get grant funding and like pay overhead at Duke for whatever lab space they're occupying. It gives Duke credibility to have an active and healthy grad student population.
It helps with
Because
undergraduate
helps with undergraduate.
enrollment.
So we can mentor undergrads, we TA, we are publishing papers. We're doing the vast majority of the lab work on a day-to-day basis is being done by grad students or a postdoc, with a not insignificant amount being contributed by like lab techs, but that is not the largest population doing it.
All right, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. We got like 15 minutes left and we can keep going down there, but I wanted to really I wanted to at least talk about what you're doing with the Go programming language.
Oh yeah.
How did that get
Yeah.
incorporated in
Yeah.
the research? So maybe what you can do is just kind of tell everybody what it is you're trying to figure out in terms of your lab, your work, and then how Go got involved and how you're using Go to do that. That to me is fascinating. I love seeing it actually.
Yeah. So my research is around vertebrate evolution, like I said, and it's requires us to do a lot of handling of very large data. And
where's the data coming from? You're generating it, or you're buying it, or it's coming from, like, what does this data look like?
Yeah. So it can be from a sequencer. So like, let's say that I have an animal that I want to know the genetic code of. I can collect its tissue and send it off to something like Illumina, which does sequencing, and it then says, okay, here's the genetic sequence of the tissue you sent us. And that is a certain file type that exists that is just sheerly like, this is what the ACTG genetic code looks like.
Is that a big file? Is it a meg? Is it a gig?
It is typically probably in the
tens of
megabytes
megs
to gigabytes, depending on what you're doing. It's really various. Sometimes you're sequencing something very specific, and sometimes you're sequencing something that's very broad. So it can vary.
And you're downloading this file from a secure place, or are they sending it to you over?
You're sending it to us, and then we
electronically.
Yes. And
I mean,
then
you
we
need a
are
decent network. Okay.
exactly.
Got it.
So, and a lot of this work ends up being done on the cluster at Duke. So we have a computing cluster at Duke because a lot of the work is just too large for a local, at least for, long-term stuff.
So they give you some compute power on that cluster for your lab, for your
Yes.
group, for
Yes. So
high-end computing.
yes. So essentially I have an allowance of doing probably, let me do the math really quick. Uh, it's like I can
So you don't have a
do,
dedicated machine. It's hours.
no, I can do hundreds of jobs that are taking like 10 gigs or less of memory uh, at a time. At like one time, I can do hundreds and hundreds of jobs.
So what happens if you gave it too much work and you run out, you get an out of memory error and then you lost some time?
It doesn't out of memory, depending on what I'm doing. So for example, right now I'm doing what's called an array on my cluster. So I have a whole bunch of jobs that are waiting to run, and each is about 8 gigs of memory required. So I think it's like 7,000 jobs.
How do you know that? Because the file is 8 meg?
So I know how much it takes because I tested it out. So the problem a lot of the times with genomics is that you have these large files, and sometimes the whole thing needs to get read into memory. But most of the time we write things specifically to avoid that
To
because they're
stream it,
typically
to
very
process in
large.
a stream.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
Exactly. So that is the goal typically, if it's possible. Sometimes it's a lot more technically complicated to do it that way, so we don't. But in this job, I know that I need 8 gigabytes for running it successfully because I tried 6 and it didn't really work most of the time. So
Okay. So it's a
so
trial and error sort of thing. But you have to do that on the cluster. You have to try that out. You can't run this on a local machine to even get a
I
general.
wouldn't run this many jobs in the local machine. If I did it once or twice, that's fine. But the problem is that the output file is pretty large and pretty wasteful in terms of its memory. But it is an intermediate file. So it's not that big of a deal that I don't have it locally because it gets transformed into another file that's much smaller later
That
on.
sounds slow to me. That you have to write to disk because you don't have memory. That has to slow this whole thing
So
down.
it is sometimes quite slow. But we do the best we can in terms of optimizing for however much we can. So like let's say I was trying to align a human genome to a chimp genome, which in general is going to be very successful because of how similar they are. It's going to take a lot of disk space to do that because the file that gets output, that gets written, is going to be mostly, yeah, that match. So we have to write this whole thing out.
Like almost two different data sets merging together.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the goal for genomics data is to be as efficient as possible in terms of file types, is to be as efficient as possible. So typically what we're trying to know at the end of this is what chromosome we're talking about and what positions on that chromosome we're talking about. And so those are the most efficient files that we work with, which are typically called bed files, where you have positional information only and no other information if it's as small as possible. And so that ideally is, what you're capable of. Most of the time, you need something more complicated because there's more information there that you need. But a lot of the times, you're working with something like a bed file.
Are you using formal machine learning models for this, or you're writing just algorithms that are tailored?
I am writing just algorithms. Somebody in my lab is starting to get more into. He published recently, so he's getting to like explore a lot more, and so he's getting into formal machine learning. There's a program called DeepStar, um, which its name is not really going to be helpful for most people because it's for biological and genomics research. But it's a program called Deep Star from the Stark Lab, and it is in understanding kind of the relationship between function and sequence without doing any experiments in between. So it's trying to learn how the sequence directly impacts the sequence's function, and assigning a numerical value to its function in terms of whatever you're interested in terms of what that function is doing, which is a whole other story. So it depends on what you're training it on. But yeah, so he's actually working on that, and he's gotten pretty far with that. So things like that definitely exist and are definitely useful. And they are frequently built off of, as you mentioned earlier, Python, TensorFlow, this one. Actually, he re-implemented it in TensorFlow too, but usually built off of something like Python, TensorFlow, but not necessarily written in Python. So yeah, so sometimes they'll be in the background of Python script.
So why did you end up using Go and not Python for this sort of stuff? Because that's not the norm from what I know.
It's not. So actually, this is an interesting caveat. My principal investigator, my boss, Craig Lowe, like I mentioned earlier, he is formally trained in computer science. That was his undergrad degree, and then his graduate degree was in bioinformatics. So he has formal training in computer science, whereas the rest of the lab does not. I like to say that we're biologists parading around as computer scientists. And so he actually came in with like a really good understanding of what he wanted to build in terms of tools in the lab with the program that he wanted to build it with, which was Go. And so Go was really like the first formal language that I learned besides scripting languages, besides shell languages. And we have come up with a lot of reasons why that's good. But we're able to like really efficiently. I think Go is probably the most friendly language for new users. That's not something like Python. Like it's the most underrated good for new users program I can think of, because it has that built-in garbage collector, and that's like so forgiving in the beginning when you just like don't know what you're doing, and it's like you don't have to worry about it so much. Whereas like C would be totally unforgiving in that arena. So we like to call it like the happy middle ground between something like Python and something like C. In terms of like biological research, it's like that accessibility and like readability of Python with the kind of function and performance of C.
Are there special packages that you're using, like GoNum or other packages that are
So
helping you?
we use the standard library for the most part, but we build a lot of our packages ourselves. But yeah, so we end up using.
Did you open source any of those packages that
Oh
you?
yeah. We have
Oh,
we have a whole platform called Genomics. We're about to put a manuscript out for its release. So yeah, we called it Genomics, but Genomics.
so what is that?
Um,
GitHub.com
GitHub.com
slash
Genomics. Um,
slash genomics. Oh, so that
Genomics.
GoNomics. So that's
Yeah.
the org. So you were able to create an organization called
Yes.
GoNomics. All right, we'll
Yeah.
have to make
So
sure
we have a
that's in
whole
the.
repository for it. Um,
Ah, so you're publishing open source software as part of this PhD program.
Yeah. It's a fantastic tool. So there's like a bunch of packages in there for all kinds of stuff in genomics research. We basically write what we need when we need it. So the more we do, the more is in there. Um, and we'll like re-implement things so that when we're doing a pipeline, we can just do it all in Genomics and we don't have to keep importing these various things. And it's all built off of the Go standard library so that it's really easy to install. So
Man, I got to get my friend Daniel Whitenack, who was doing this kind of stuff in Go early on. He actually has another podcast about. I'm going to introduce you to Daniel because I think you need to talk to. You can get more technical with Daniel on this stuff. The moment you say standard deviation, my brain said, "Okay, we're done."
Yeah, and it's a really cool, and like it's super, like we go out of our way to write it so that people can read it. So I mean, obviously, like, it's built off of things like, the file types that we're using, but we try to put so much documentation in there, and that's the other thing that we absolutely adore about
So
Go, is that the
what
documentation is uploaded automatically.
what percent of your time during the month is spent actually on the keyboard coding?
Like 100% of my working time I'm coding right now. Yeah. I'm not doing anything else right now but doing various amounts of coding. So we actually so I'll use shells to like interface between various Go programs if necessary. But if I'm not using C shell or bash to like, wrap something, I'm using Go. Like that's pretty much it. My day to day right now.
So you have another year before you have you get your PhD. There are other people in your part of your team that are graduating now, and they have that same sort of go experience, and they've been reaching out. At least one person's reached out and started asking me a little bit about like what's out there. And I had told them, I think you want to look at companies that are doing AI and ML, AI and machine learning, because that's kind of where your experience is right now. What are you, we got like 5 minutes left here. So, what are you thinking about in terms of after you get your PhD in a year? Do you want to now jump into industry? Do you want to find a lab at another university? You may not ever get to code and go again if you do that. So,
I know.
like,
Yeah,
what do
I
you want
am.
to do?
I am very much in the phase of like trying to leave academia. I know where my strengths are, and I am not strong in the areas that academia would like me to be on in like the permanent sense. I'm like very bad at remembering like where things came from, like in terms of like the labs and um
Are
like
you
my
bummed
strengths are
out?
not.
Are you bummed out about that because you wanted this is what you wanted, and now you're at the end of this journey at the road, and you're like, you know what? I want off this road.
So the thing about PhDs is that like most of us don't go into academia. Um which is hard to grasp, I think, in terms of just generally because of the pipeline that you're in once you get into a PhD. So most of us don't end up there, uh, just because there's so many other things we can do, and we've learned so many things in this process that it's unique to this process. Um, so yeah, so as soon as we figure out how to market ourselves, we are very marketable. But like we're not very good at marketing ourselves. So in general, people are like whatever. Um, so yeah, so I'm leaving academia. I'm not necessarily bummed out about it. I'm like more choosing the path that makes sense for me. Um, Academia is not it for me. It's not my path, and I've known that for a while, for long enough to come to terms with that.
I love how you're sticking with it to get to finish at least what you started. I like that.
It's an education. Like, I mean, I came in wanting to learn computational skills. Like that was my like big broad goal, is that I knew that I was gonna be able to like use those skills somewhere in the future. I just wasn't sure where. Um and yeah, so like a lot of my experience right now is in like data management and data handling and data engineering. And so like I don't have any problem going into something like that and using Go or using something else to do something along those lines. But I mean, I am a problem solver at heart, so like engineering is like kind of where I'd love to go. It is like my yeah, we're it's hard for me to get over that feeling when I like get a test that works really well. Like, like if solving the problem.
What is sort of a year from now, like what would be your dream sort of job?
I want to have a job that has clear edges, which is not something that we get in PhD world. Um, I would love something that lets me problem solve as much as possible. Like that is my big values based thing. I want to problem solve or like troubleshoot. Like that's I love doing that.
Is that something you want to do in the form of like you'd like to continue to be a programmer in this sense, like in Go programming or
Yeah, ideally, yeah. I have the most experience in Go, so I love Go. Go's fun for me. Yeah, it is such a nice thing to play with. There's like more and more resources all the time. Um, yeah, and obviously it's nostalgic for me because it's my first like big proper language. Um,
and you've got at least 2 years almost full-time programming in it. I mean, you have that experience.
yeah, I have a lot of Go background and like building open source. Um, which has been really fun. Yeah, and GitHub
And your
experience, which is
teammates
like
too.
oh other thing. Yeah, so my teammates have been so we have used exclusively Go for that genomics platform. So before I even started, there was already a couple of years of work there from various teammates.
Okay. Our time is up. Um, this is fascinating. And anybody listening, Okay, Christy's going to be on the job market in like 10 months here. So if you're looking for some engineers with a couple years of experience, not just Christy, but also some of her teammates are there. So if anybody wants to reach out to you after listening to the show, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So you can use my Duke email, which is the shortest one that I have. It's CF, my initials, 189 at duke.edu. Feel free to reach out there. Or if you find me on LinkedIn, feel free to there as well. But yeah.
Now you have a
Um,
Twitter account, which in tech,
yeah, we have the
I
lab.
think it's important. You have the lab
Yeah, we
Twitter.
have the lab Twitter account.
We
It
need to
is
get you a personal Twitter.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've somehow not had one yet. So at VertGen Lab, Vertebrate Genomics Lab, so VERTGEN Lab. On Twitter is my lab account. So obviously feel free to reach out there or tag us. Yeah, we're gonna have this up whenever this gets published. We're gonna be linking this on our website because my boss absolutely loves that this is happening.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'll retweet it and share it, and maybe we can get your boss on stage to talk about it
Oh, he would
at
love
some of the
that.
Go
He's a Go
conferences.
diehard. He would love that.
So then he has to send me an email after we're done here, and I'd love to get him on stage. And the CFPs are now available for a lot of the conferences, so we gotta move now. But yeah, have him email me because I'd love to see this stuff being talked about on stage at the conferences this year.
Yeah, I'm sure he would love to go.
We'll get you on stage. You can talk about your part.
Yeah. He is so good at like the big picture stuff and like describing, the big picture of what we're doing and like how it's relating to Go. It's, he's great at speaking. So he would be excellent for a
All right,
conference.
so I need to talk to him. All right, so we're out of time. Thank you so much for sharing your story over the last like hour and a half with us here. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait till you can start calling you Dr. Christie, and then we're going to get you a go job in the industry, and it's going to be super exciting.
Yeah, I'm
All
really
right.
excited.
So this is Christy and Bill Kennedy signing off here at the On Labs podcast, and hope to see everybody again real soon.